They told me I wasn't welcome at Thanksgiving. No dish, no invitation, no seat at the table, because apparently I had nothing to bring. But when they showed up at the mansion for their fancy dinner, bragging about legacy and family values, they didn't know the house they were celebrating in, the one with the chandelier they couldn't stop admiring, was mine. Hi, I'm Vanessa. I used to be the girl they cropped out of family photos. Now, I hold the deed they toasted under. And if you've ever been underestimated or made to feel like you don't belong, this one's for you. Before we dive into the story, I'd love to get to know you a little better. Drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from. That way, I can send you a special shout-out. Now let's begin our story together. I hadn't checked the Morgan family group chat in months, maybe longer, but that afternoon, the notifications poured in like confetti I never asked for. Potluck assignments confirmed. Don't forget the pecan pie. Brian's carving the turkey this year. I scrolled in silence, curled up on the corner of my slate gray sectional, a mug of cinnamon tea warming my palms. Outside, Charlotte's skyline shimmered under a soft November sun, the kind that offered light but no real heat. And then it came. Mom's message slid onto the screen, tucked between talk of centerpieces and seating charts. We didn't assign you a dish, Vanessa. Didn't want you to feel out of place. I stared at it longer than I should have. No exclamation point, no smiley face. Just the same kind of soft dismissal I'd grown used to. Polite, measured, and slicing sharper than she probably realized. For a moment, I wanted to type something back. Anything. But I didn't. I had said enough years ago, and still, somehow, not nearly enough. I set the phone down and wandered to the window. Below me, the city hummed, cars streaming through wide boulevards, shoppers bustling with early holiday bags. I watched a father carry his daughter on his shoulders past a hot dog stand. Her hair bounced with each step. He looked tired, but peaceful. The last Thanksgiving I was invited to, Clarissa made a show of bringing truffle-deviled eggs in a crystal tray. I brought sweet potato casserole in a foil pan. She told Brian, in a voice just loud enough for me to hear, that it smelled like grocery store shame. I didn't go back after that. The phone buzzed again. I almost didn't look, but curiosity tugged. A new notification, property transfer complete. Closing confirmed. My eyes narrowed. Client, Brian Morgan. Destination, Peachtree Manor. Booking method, Executive Concierge Portal. Registered owner, Crescent Summit, LLC. My lips curled, not from surprise, from irony. Peachtree Manor wasn't just a Georgian-style mansion tucked behind iron gates. It was also mine. Acquired last quarter through my real estate firm, registered under one of our shell holdings for discretion. I hadn't even stepped foot inside yet. And now, my brother had unknowingly booked it for Thanksgiving. The universe has an odd sense of humor sometimes. My phone rang. Marcus. Right on cue. Vanessa, he said, voice low and steady. Final papers came through. Peachtree's fully transferred. You want me to block the upcoming event? Brian's name popped up on the internal calendar. I turned from the window and walked to the marble island in my kitchen, where the property welcome kit sat untouched. No, I said, leave it. Let them have their dinner. Marcus paused. You sure? I'm sure, I replied. We'll just keep the cameras running, quietly. A beat passed. Then, you always did play the long game. I smiled. It's not a game, Marcus. It's just time. After we hung up, I reached for the envelope atop the welcome kit. Thick, cream-colored, sealed with gold embossing. Inside, a floor plan, passcodes, catering contacts. Everything was laid out in luxury. Beneath it all, a brass nameplate glinted. V. Morgan, owner. I traced the letters with my fingertip, remembering the younger version of myself, fresh out of law school, eager to prove something, then quietly folding that ambition into something sturdier when the family made it clear I'd stepped too far outside the lines. Another ping. Emily. They rented a mansion for the Thanksgiving dinner through a luxury platform. You might want to check who owns it. I replied with a single period, then walked to my desk, opened my laptop, and typed a short note to the estate staff. Prepare the house. I'll be stopping by on Thanksgiving Day. Quietly. I hit send, then closed the lid. They always said I had nothing to bring. Turns out I brought the roof. There's a special kind of quiet that follows a conversation you never got to have. It lingers like steam after a shower, faint, clinging, refusing to leave completely. I've lived in that kind of quiet for years. On nights like this, when the wind pushed against the tall windows of my apartment and jazz floated low from the corner speaker, I sometimes let myself scroll through the drafts folder of my inbox. There were 22 unsent emails to my family. The oldest was from 2017. Subject, update from me. I had just left the firm and was working out of a shared workspace downtown. I'd attached a picture of the first digital prototype my startup had built. Nothing fancy, but it worked. I wrote, I know you probably think I made a mistake, but I believe in this. And then, like a kid still trying to prove herself, I added, hope your Thanksgiving was good. I never sent it. The others were similar. Progress reports no one asked for. Notes about late nights and small victories. A few times I tried to explain, to bridge the silence. But eventually, the silence felt easier than trying to be heard through their noise. I closed the laptop and stood, stretching my arms above my head. The room was warm, lit by nothing but the lamp beside the couch and the reflection of the city outside. I walked over to the closet and pulled open a cedar-scented box. Inside was the burgundy dress. It wasn't expensive. I bought it off a clearance rack years ago, before I knew the difference between silk and polyester blends. I'd worn it to Thanksgiving the year Clarissa wrinkled her nose and said, bold choice. I guess everyone's doing the whole retro thing now. The way she said retro made it sound like desperate. That was the last year I brought pie. Still, I kept the dress. Not out of spite, but because something in me knew it wasn't the dress that didn't belong. It was the way they looked at it. I laid the dress on my bed and smoothed the fabric, then walked back to the dining area, where a table mock-up had been quietly forming over the past few days. I wasn't planning a real dinner, not for guests. I just needed the visual, a single place setting, a linen napkin, and now a small handwritten card I slid next to the plate. Vanessa Morgan. Host. That word. Host. It settled somewhere deep in my chest, not because it meant power, but because it meant choice. There was a time when I'd sit at tables and feel grateful just to be tolerated. Now I'd built the table, and the house that held it. My phone buzzed. Emily, do you want me to bring anything for Thursday? I can do wine or dessert. I smiled. Me, no need. Just bring your camera. You'll want to remember this. The typing bubble danced for a moment, then stopped. Typical Emily. Always thinking, always feeling more than she let on. She never fully chose sides, but she never made me feel invisible either. That was more than most. I turned back to the table and picked up the binder resting on the console shelf. Black leather, simple, heavy with pages I'd compiled over the years. Financials, property deeds, company valuations, old text messages saved in screenshots. I had titled it Receipts and Resilience. It wasn't for revenge. Not exactly. It was for me. To remind myself that every time they said, why don't you just come back to the firm? Or, you used to have so much promise. I was building something real, even if they never asked about it, even if they talked over me, even if they filled the silence with stories of themselves. Some dreams don't shout. They hum quietly beneath the noise, growing stronger while no one's paying attention. I placed the binder on the end of the table, a symbol, a weight, a presence. Then I walked to the mirror by the front door and looked at myself, hair loose, face calm, the dress still folded on the bed behind me. I could picture it already, how I'd wear it not to prove anything, but because it felt right. I touched the mirror lightly and said, barely above a whisper, this year, I'm not asking for a seat. I paused. I own the table. There's a difference between walking into a house and being welcomed into a home. That afternoon, they did the first. They arrived with their coats perfectly pressed and their expectations even more so, stepping across the threshold of a place they didn't realize was mine. I sat in my car a block away, engine off, radio muted. On my phone screen, the security feed displayed 4 angles: the foyer, the dining room, the back hallway, and the library. Each view bathed in soft golden light, the kind that made everything seem more expensive than it was. Clarissa was the first to arrive, of course. She swept through the front door in a camel-colored wrap coat, sunglasses still perched atop her head despite the fading light. The staff greeted her with a measured nod, as I had instructed, formal but not overly warm. She barely glanced at them. "Oh, yes, this will do," she said aloud, her heels clicking across the marble tile as she turned in a slow circle. "Brian, I told you Peachtree had the right tone. Very old money, minimal fuss." Brian trailed behind her, one hand on his phone, the other gesturing vaguely. "As long as the wine's not warm and the lighting hides our wrinkles, I'm happy." He chuckled. No one else did. Guests trickled in slowly after that. Cousins I hadn't seen in years, plus Lorraine and David, my parents, who made their entrance as if auditioning for a holiday movie. Dad in his tailored charcoal suit, Mom in winter pearls, both holding their silence like fine china. The foyer camera caught the moment Brian raised his phone for a selfie. Clarissa leaned in, lips pursed just so, and murmured, "Get the chandelier in the shot." Makes it feel grander. That chandelier cost me $17,000 and a 2-week delay in inspections. It used to hang in a Savannah estate before I had it cleaned and rewired. They didn't know that. They didn't care to. Back inside the car, I slipped off my flats and tucked them beneath the seat. Then I reached for the heels beside me, burgundy, like the dress folded neatly on my lap. My fingers paused. Not yet. Inside, the dining room was filling quickly. The table, dressed in lace runners and gold-rimmed china, seated 20. Every detail had been chosen carefully, not by Clarissa, but by my design team. The candles were soy. The flowers were late autumn hellebores and rust-colored hydrangeas, set low so no one had to lean around them to speak. Brian tapped his glass with a butter knife, clearing his throat. "Before we eat," he began, "I just want to say how proud I am that we can all gather like this, in a place worthy of our family's legacy." He glanced around, soaking in the oohs and nods. "This isn't just a house," he added. "It's a reflection of who we are. Strong roots, elegant traditions, a little taste of history." My thumb hovered over the mute button on the feed. I didn't press it. I wanted to hear it all. Out of frame, Emily was moving quietly, capturing moments with her phone, details I'd asked her to note. Clarissa asking the staff to replace a bottle of champagne that hadn't been chilled enough. Brian criticizing the centerpiece as too heavy on red. Lorraine adjusting the silverware for symmetry. None of them knew. They didn't know that the floral designer they were critiquing was someone I'd mentored in her first job, or that the head server had worked at my first boutique hotel, back when I was still folding linens during lunch breaks, or that the reason the dining chairs matched their exact taste was because I had once spent 3 Thanksgivings taking notes on what they complained about. I stepped out of the car and into the crisp afternoon. The wind tugged at the hem of my coat as I walked the side path toward the service door. It creaked softly as I entered, the scent of roasted herbs and warm bread meeting me in the corridor. The library was empty, quiet. Oak-paneled walls, a fire dancing low behind the glass screen. I walked barefoot across the herringbone floor, the same one I'd personally approved from reclaimed wood samples 2 years ago. My reflection passed through a framed mirror above the fireplace. I didn't look long. At the threshold of the hallway, I paused to slip on my heels. From the dining room, Brian's voice lifted again. "Let's toast," he said, "to legacy and bringing something meaningful to the table." The room erupted in clinks and polite laughter. I stepped into view. At first, no one noticed. It was like stepping into a dream and watching it rearrange itself around you. Then Emily lowered her phone, and Brian's hand, halfway to his glass, froze. Clarissa blinked once, then twice. I walked slowly, evenly, to the center of the table. The click of my heels was the only sound. Then, with both hands, I set the leather binder gently beside the roast turkey. I didn't smile. Since I wasn't invited, I said, voice calm but steady, I figured I'd welcome you instead. Dear friend, what would you do if you were in my shoes? I bet you can't guess what's coming next. But before we go any further, drop a 5 in the comments if you're still with me, because what happens next might just leave you speechless. And then silence. The room didn't fall silent all at once. It happened in waves, a clink of glass here, a whisper cut off mid-sentence there, the kind of silence that feels like a shift in air pressure, heavy, full of something unsaid. I stood still at the head of the table, both hands resting lightly on the leather binder now occupying the place where the turkey had been. The candles flickered taller for a second, as if catching their breath. Brian recovered first. He leaned back in his chair, one arm slung along the back of it like he was posing for a photo. Vanessa, he said, his voice tight around the edges of a smile. If this is your way of trying to make a point, well done. Theatrics. Mystery. I mean, I didn't see this coming. He chuckled. No one joined him. Clarissa cleared her throat and reached for her wine glass. Is this some kind of performance art? I didn't answer either of them. Not yet. I opened the binder slowly. The pages inside were arranged with precision. Title deed, property ownership certificate, contracts from the interior designer, catering staff, the concierge who'd handled the booking, all bearing the name Crescent Summit LLC, with a signature line that read, in small, confident script, Vanessa L. Morgan. I turned the binder so it faced the room and stepped back just enough so they could all see. This isn't a performance, I said. This is paperwork, facts, history. Brian's smile flickered. You're saying, you booked this place? Through some friend? No, I said. I bought it. Last quarter, Clarissa snorted. Come on, you expect us to believe that? She stopped herself, but we all knew where that sentence was headed. That I'm what? I asked, voice still level. Not qualified, not capable, not the kind of person who owns chandeliers and floor plans and signatures that matter? Her eyes narrowed. That dress again? I glanced down. Burgundy. Same as that Thanksgiving years ago. Same fabric, same waistline, same quiet rebellion. I smiled. The one you said was too cheap for a family dinner. I figured since you liked it so much, I'd wear it to the one you forgot to invite me to. A few guests shifted in their chairs. Forks were laid down without a sound. David, my father, leaned forward. He didn't raise his voice, but his tone cut clean through the room. You could have handled this better. I met his eyes. I did, for 10 years. I paused. Every time I bit my tongue, every time I showed up with a dish no one touched, every time I RSVP'd yes, only to find out there was no chair for me. That was me handling it with grace. I walked slowly along the table's edge now, looking at each face, some confused, some guilty, most still pretending this was a misunderstanding. I didn't come here to embarrass you, I said. You've done that work yourselves. I came here to make something visible that's been true for a long time. Brian crossed his arms. Which is what, exactly? I stopped behind my old seat, the one they never actually reserved. That you told me I had nothing to bring, I said. No place. No contribution, no value. My hand brushed the edge of the place setting, the china, the cloth napkin, the gold-trimmed name cards they hadn't even personalized. Well, I continued, it turns out I brought the house, the food, the roof over your heads, and perhaps most ironically, the legacy. Emily was silent, her phone resting in her palm but not recording anymore. I saw her eyes, not full of pity, but something gentler, a kind of knowing. Clarissa set her napkin down with a sharp snap and stood, her chair screeching against the floor. "You ruined dinner," she hissed, cheeks flushed. I turned toward her and spoke the truth as calmly as I could. "No," I said. "I finally served it." She stood there for a moment longer, perhaps expecting someone to follow her lead, but no one moved. The candles kept burning. The chandelier hummed above them all, and the binder, thick with names and numbers they never bothered to ask about, stayed open at the center of the table. No one said thank you. No one had to. The silence said enough. The dining room felt different now. The lights hadn't dimmed, but the space had. Half the chairs were empty. A few cousins had slipped out with muttered goodbyes and unfinished pie. The floral centerpiece leaned slightly, wilting in one corner like it had seen too much. I stood at the head of the table, the binder now closed and resting quietly near the salt shaker. No one was talking. David sat 2 seats down, arms crossed, his eyes fixed somewhere near the fireplace. Lorraine sat opposite him, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She kept looking at the tablecloth, like maybe it would tell her something she'd missed. I walked to the sideboard and lifted a small white dish. Cranberries, tart and bright, made the way I always made them. Orange zest, a little clove, just enough sugar to balance. No one had touched it, not this time either. Years ago, I brought the same dish to dinner and watched as Clarissa placed it behind the rolls. When no one tasted it, she said, "Don't worry, Vanessa. There's always next year." I carried the dish back to the table. My heels barely made a sound now. The house seemed to know we'd passed the point of noise. I stopped beside my father and gently set the bowl in front of him. "This was mine then, too," I said softly. "You just didn't try it." He didn't look up, but his jaw shifted, like he was holding something back and wasn't sure what to do with it. His hand twitched toward the serving spoon, then fell still again. Lorraine finally broke the silence. Her voice was small but clear. "Why now?" I looked at her, not unkindly. "Because healing doesn't wait for permission," I said. "Neither does ownership." She nodded, almost imperceptibly, like part of her understood, like another part wished she didn't. I stepped away before the air grew too heavy. Out through the back hallway, past the quiet kitchen, and onto the stone patio. The wind had picked up. Leaves danced in small spirals across the flagstones. I pulled out my phone and dialed Marcus. He answered on the second ring. "Well," he said. "I did it," I replied. There was a pause on his end. Then, "How do you feel?" "Like someone set down a weight I didn't know I was carrying." "I figured," he said. "They still in there?" "Most of them left. The rest, they're sitting with it." "Do you want to sell the house now?" I looked back toward the French doors. The house glowed warm behind the glass. It didn't feel like something to sell. Not yet. "No," I said. "It still has something to say." Marcus didn't question that. He never did. "All right," he said. "Call me when you're ready." "I will." We hung up without goodbyes, the kind of conversation that didn't need them. I turned back inside and saw Lorraine standing by the buffet table, her hands resting on the edge. She didn't say anything. I didn't either. But something passed between us. Not forgiveness, not understanding, just presence. David was still seated. He'd moved slightly, his hand now resting on something in front of him. I looked closer. It was a business card, my old one, from the boutique hotel I opened before all this, the one I'd left tucked beneath the binder, partly out of habit, partly out of hope. He picked it up, turned it once in his fingers, didn't look at me, didn't speak, and I didn't need him to. Some moments aren't made for speeches, just quiet acknowledgments of what was missed and what remains. I walked toward the hallway. Emily appeared near the archway, her coat already on, her phone back in her pocket. She tilted her head slightly. "You feel better?" she asked. I didn't rush the answer. "I feel," I said, pausing as the dining room faded behind me, "lighter." And that was enough. The house was quiet now, not the kind of quiet that follows tension or awkwardness, but the kind that feels earned, like the silence after a deep exhale. Candles had burned low, empty plates had been cleared. Somewhere down the hallway, the last coat had been picked up from the back of a chair. I stood barefoot on the stone path just outside the kitchen door, holding my heels in one hand. The cool of the stone pressed gently against the soles of my feet, grounding me. The trees above swayed, their tall shadows stretching across the lawn like soft reminders that the world was still turning, no matter what happened inside. Leaves rustled and crunched beneath each step. I let them. The air smelled of fireplace smoke and damp earth, honest smells. I closed my eyes for a moment and listened. Just wind, just night, just me. In the quiet, a memory found its way in. I was 8, sitting on the porch of my grandfather's cabin in the mountains, legs dangling, chin on my knees. He handed me a mug of cider far too hot for a child and said, "A home isn't walls or wallpaper. It's the place where your story has room to breathe." I didn't understand it then, but tonight I did. When I stepped back inside, the house had shifted again. Still beautiful, still lit, but no longer a stage. Now it felt like mine, not just by deed, but by meaning. I passed the chandelier in the foyer. Earlier, it had glittered with performance. Now, dimmed, it simply offered light. The dining room was empty, chairs pushed in, silver polished. Even the cranberry dish had been quietly cleared away. I walked to the table and set something down, a folded card, no seal, no name. Inside, in my own handwriting, it read, "This year, I brought grace." I didn't need to leave a speech or a list or a ledger, just that. Before leaving, I walked once more through the library, where the fire was now no more than a faint orange glow. I touched the back of the armchair I never got to sit in when I was younger. There was nothing bitter in the gesture, just memory and space. My phone buzzed as I stepped toward the front door. "Marcus, all clear?" I smiled. Me, clear, and quiet. Then after a pause, I typed again. "I'll keep it. For now, maybe for good." I placed my heels down just inside the door, slipped them on, and turned the lock. It didn't click like a goodbye. It clicked like ownership, not of the building, of the story. Outside, Emily waited by the gate. She didn't say anything, just offered a nod, her breath visible in the cold air. I nodded back. As I stepped off the porch, the last hallway light behind me flicked off. Automatic timer, but it felt like punctuation. I smiled into the night, not a grin, just a soft curl at the corner of my mouth. Next Thanksgiving? I thought to myself. Mine. I didn't leave that house to applause or apologies. I left with my head clear, my story intact, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing I no longer needed their approval to feel whole. Sometimes the healing doesn't come from what others finally say. It comes from what you finally stop waiting to hear. Grace isn't about forgetting what hurt you. It's about choosing not to carry it where you're going next. If this story reminded you of a time you stood quietly in your own strength, I'd love to hear it. Feel free to share what part stayed with you, because sometimes the most powerful truths are the ones we tell each other.